right. Can y'all hear me? Are we good? Okay. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank y'all for that introduction. No pressure. I'm just teasing. I just want to say thanks to Alan and Searing and Adrian for inviting me to the space and into the classrooms, and to Ava and Jackie for your introduction, and to the class that I visited today for such excellent questions. It's a pleasure to be at Villanova, to be out of Iowa for a little bit, and to be a part of the Lit Fest. That it feels really, really nice. I'm gonna set my timer because otherwise I'll just go on and on. So I'm going to read probably for about 25, 30-ish minutes. I wanted to read a couple of poems. I wanted to start with some poems from the first book, from Bestiary, in part because we were talking about some things in the class today that I thought might be sort of interesting. So I'm going to need y'all's help. So a centaur. Y'all know what a centaur looks like? A lot of people are like, yes, obviously. It's my favorite. So the body of a horse, and then the upper torso, like the upper part of like a man's body. So like that's a lot of limbs, right? That's like 6 limbs. One time I was reading and someone said that they'd read an article that said the human part could not eat enough to fuel the horse part. And then I said that at a reading, and someone came up to me and said, well, what if it was a little horse? That has nothing to do with the poem, but sometimes I think about it. Someone's like, you're thinking about this wrong. Nothing to do with the poem. So this is Love Poem Centaur. Nothing approaches a field like me. Hard gallop, hard chest, hooves and mane and flicking tail. My love, I apprehend each flower, each winged body, saturated in a light that burnishes. I would make a burnishing of you, by which I mean a field in flower, by which I mean a breaching, my hands making an arrow of themselves, rooting the loosened dirt. I would make for you the barest of sounds, there at the point of articulation. Love, I pound the earth for you. I pound the earth. No, I don't. But that's what a centaur would do. I'm not a centaur. This is Love Poem Centaur. I have never known a field as wild as your heart, or galloped or hardened my breast in the sun. I call my own bluff and bravado. What I apprehend needs no apprehension. What I make stands undone. Here is my hand, soft, uncalloused. Here a lock of my mane. Now I am afraid, and so I turn to the field, the flower and red beetle and winter light, the cardinal hen, your pretty brown bird cutting the sky. This poem is titled Little Box. I haven't read this poem in a long time, but I do like it. It doesn't matter, I'm just telling y'all. It's one of those people. Little Box. The woman you love is afraid she is hurting you. This is the source of her fear. You are afraid to say, I am hurting. You are crying. You are afraid your parents will discover that you are crying again and send you again to therapy, where a woman with long hair and a long skirt will point to the doll house and ask where the mother doll sleeps, and the father, and if they have a child, where the child doll sleeps. You speak in therapy. Every statement begins, I feel, even when you mean, why are you hurting me? You'd rather be a simpler animal. You try to imagine what the bear feels, the seal, the otter, always a little group of 3. You worry they are not, in fact, simpler, but you are sure they are never lonely. You hate your loneliness as you hated yourself as a child. You are bored with your hatred. You want her to stop hurting you. You want to say, I love you again and again. This will change nothing. And you've already said it. When you were a child in therapy, you understood where each doll went. You learned not to cry. There is no teacher now to tell your parents in any way your mother doesn't remember you, and you are settling into hating your father, though you are afraid you are as careless and cruel as they taught you to be. You will see your therapist in 2 weeks. Her hair is short, and she is from the same city as the woman you love. You will tell her you are sad and hurting. You will be matter of fact. You will think of the seal, a mother perhaps, how she might be lonely for a lost pup. But there will be another, and she will forget the one that was eaten by an orca or polar bear or neglect. You will tell your therapist none of this. You will no longer speak to the woman who has your heart. You will put her in the room farthest away from your own. She will sleep where the father should be. And the last poem from Bestiary that I'll read is Archaeology. I don't think there's anything to say about this one. So, Archaeology. More and more, I find the image of my father in my own face, an emptiness behind the eyes. I am unable to move, the ore in my blood, slurried and slow, the sun bruising the sky in its slow drag. I am dragging his face out of my own. I am the sun and the sky and the hot bruise. I squint against my own light, which is my father's light, which is me. I am an archaeologist, sifting the grit of my muddled blood. There is nothing behind my eyes but the stone you left me with him. You left when he settled into my face, a hot bruise. I am dragging the sun in my empty blood. More and more I find in the image of ore, your muddled eyes. You are unable to move. Archaeologist, you sift my face, which is his, which is stone. So I'm going to read some poems now from the Renunciations, and I'm actually going to start, I think, with love poem. Okay. Love poem. Let us be ocean and coast, a taking into and over one another, shifting sediment, a breaking down of rock, dredge and deposit, a series of prepositions meaning proximity, although the most of us extends away from one another. Once in winter, I ventured far inland, forgot the crash of gravity pulling you over me and away, forgot there is a place where we meet and retreat but never let go. Let this be a moment of remembering, my love, as I stand at the edge of myself, cliff and seagrass and the screaming gull above, sighting your breath to the horizon. Sometimes I read this poem. So I wrote this poem for my ex-wife, and she was like, but I am not the ocean. And she does not like metaphor. So sometimes I read that, I just think, that was a miss, but I like the poem. Okay. In the chapel of St. Mary's. I can't tell you what happened there, why I entered the sanctuary a non-believer, only that I have been thinking about worship, the altar of the body, and supplication for some time. My thoughts turn, as they often do in this season of absence, to my wife and how tired a God can get when called, and too often for little reason but loneliness. Of course, I don't mean God here, but rather the woman I love, who alters the orbit of my life, pulls me with the density of light toward her, the draw thinner when she is farther away, as she is now. I try to find comfort in the inevitability of science when what I lack is faith. The sanctuary, the stained glass, 4 girls saturating it with soft chatter, small pots of stargazer lilies, a lace ribbon for each pew. This place is full of faith in the unknown, and I don't know how to believe in what I cannot see. Tonight, I will drive through the foothills and into the valley. I will try to make a little practice to trust you are with me, even though you are somewhere else. Oracle. The God in my brain is no God, only a homunculus I recognize as myself. The God in my heart, the the same. The God of my liver, the same. The God of my guts and thin skin, me. The homunculus guiding my father bears his mustache and heavy-lidded eyes. Was it he who placed the God in me that is me? And what do I mean by God, I wonder? I take my questions to the oracle, say either, who placed the God in me, or what do I mean when I say God? The reply to both being, your father. Stupid oracle, I think. Fathers are for children, and I was never a child, only a smaller image of myself. Donika questions the oracle. Who hid my dad in the mountain, impoverished, where he would remain invisible and rationed, not on milk and honey, but on bologna and saltines, until he grew strong enough to kill the father? Which father? Do I mean his daddy, exiled for the rest of his diabetic days to a closet in a house with no power, no water, where my dad, his sisters, and his brothers, caught for a time by the crack rock and the pipe lighting up in the dark, lived? Surely not his daddy, oracle. Surely not. How long was he the youngest? How long was he a child? What God swallowed him whole? The God, perhaps, who split his mother in two or took his brother with a bullet from another father's gun in the sunlight in the afternoon? Did he really hold his dying brother's hand, oracle, the brother who wanted only an apology on my dad's behalf? Who held him when his mother died? Who told him of a heaven where dead mothers and brothers go? Oh, the pigeons. What of the pigeons, oracle? Did he tend them, watch them rise from the roof of the house with no power or water but a daddy in a closet, his sisters and brothers flaring in the rock light? Did he delight in their return? The pigeons, I mean. Did he ever delight, oracle, in anything a child might? Did he look for his name in the sky? Did he ride a bike made from junk parts in the South Central LA sun fast as a boy might? Surely he did that, oracle. Surely that. And when he rose, like an improbable stone from the father's gut, whichever father I mean here, whichever father makes sense, the siblings, the pigeons, his daddy in exile, his name in the sky, when he rose with the stone of himself in his hand, covered in bile and mucus, free now of someone more powerful than the child he surely once was, did he know the terrible thing he would become? Okay. So I imagine most of us know about Pegasus. We know what Pegasus looks like, right? So once again, you're like, yes, a winged horse, obviously, Donika. I have a lot of questions about the whole gestation situation with Pegasus, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. What I'm going to talk about is the fact that Pegasus has a sibling. Did you know that? See? So education. This is actually one of my favorite either. So it's either a winged boar or it's a golden giant man. Sure. Those things are the same. If it's a golden giant man, then he becomes the father of Dorian, who tends the red cattle, who Heracles steals as a part of his 12 labors. That is actually useful information for the poem, I think. Unlike some of the other offerings I've given you. So this is Portrait of My Father as a Winged Boar. When his mother dies, by metal turned slicing blade, from her blood springs my father, whose name I refuse to say as he refuses his father, the half-known man who sired him. In the dry LA light, the boy my father turns so that he is caught. One way, a winged boar, another, a giant, a gold blade of a man, both high-skulled, thick-maned, a juvenile without a sounder, a boy without a mother. He recognizes himself only in the man, carves himself into golden armor, but the rutting fact of him, the curved tooth, the thick neck and beating wings, trembles beneath his skin. Whatever sheen the California sun burnishes out of his body, whatever good work his thickening hand compels, whatever woman he touches in the afternoon on the roof, he cannot deny his firstborn, his red fledgling, her many heads and hands. What he makes for her. A junk bike she loves, Cattle, red in the field, a mirror, a red wreckage of her body. From the Catalog of Cruelty. Once, I slapped my sister with the back of my hand. We were so small, but I wanted to know how it felt. My hand raised high across the opposite shoulder, slicing down like a trapeze. Her face caught my hand. I'd slapped her in our yellow room with circus animals on the curtains. I don't remember how it felt. I was a rough child. I said no. I said, these are my things. I was speaking, usually, of my socks. White, athletic, thin and already gray on the bottom, never where I left them. I was speaking of my fists raining down on my brother's back, my sister's, socks. In the 4th grade in California, I kicked Charles in the testicles. At that school, we played softball, hit the red playground ball with the sides of our hands and ran the bases. I kicked Charles with the top of my foot, caught him in the hinge of ankle. I wanted to see what would happen. I didn't believe anything could hurt like it did on TV. Charles folded in half at the crease of his waist. My God, I was a rough child, but I believed Charles that my foot turned him to paper. Later, I kicked my dad the same way, but he did not crumple. It was summer in Arkansas. What humidity, these children full of water. I hit him also with the frying pan. I hit him also with the guitar. We laughed later. Where had the guitar come from? My dad was a star collapsing. The first thing a dying star does is swell, swallows whatever is near. He tried to take us into his body, which was the house the police entered. This is how I knew he was dying. I'd called the police. What is your name? He tried to put us through the walls of the house the police entered, which was his body. What is your name? Compromised, the integrity of a body contracting. What is your name, sir? He answered, Kronos. He answered, I'm hungry. He answered, a god long dead. He threw up all his children right there on the carpet. After all, we were so small, the children. The thing about a star collapsing is that it knows neither that it is a star nor in collapse. Everything is stardust, everything essential. What is your name? Everything is resisting arrest. Its gravity crushes the children and the cruiser's rear passenger window. The officer didn't know the star's name. White dwarf, black hole, to see. Throw the collapsing star face first into anything, face first into the back seat, face first into the pepper spray, face first onto the precinct lawn. Did you know you could throw a star? Do you understand gravity, its weaknesses? You were in my house. You should already know my name. So there's a series of poems in the book, in the Renunciations, titled Dear. So it's like Dear and then an M dash, sort of gesturing towards like a 19th century letter writing convention. So as you may recall, I mentioned my ex-wife did not like metaphor. You remember this when I said this earlier? And so I thought, let me try again. Love poems are tricky. Love poems are tricky. So this is Dear. I am neither land nor timber. Neither are you ocean nor celestial body. Rather, we are the small animals we have always been. Land and sea know each other at the threshold where they meet, as we know something of one another, having shown at different times some bit of flesh, some feeling. We called the showing knowing instead of practice. We said at different times, a feeling comes. What is the metaphor for two animals sharing the same space? Marriage? We shared a practice, a series of postures. See how I became a tree. And you, a body in space. I can't remember now if that one went over better. It's hard to know. It's been a little while now. So what's the next one? Okay. Hymn. Dear river, dear creek, dear dammed tributaries, dear fuse, dear dynamite and wet match, amen. The water don't love me and she don't love me, and maybe I'm drowning from the inside. Who put the river in my arm, said, don't let the water. Maybe the knife got a hard kiss and a sweet bite. Maybe the knife only metal and wood and a bit of brass, but maybe it know how to love the inside of me. Maybe I don't believe in meaning and God and plans and paths, and the closer I am to my animal self, the more human I am, the more I let myself break like a wave, ocean in my arm, stone in my arm, iron and wood and brass in my arm. So, the speaker's struggling, but then goes and sees some buds. So this is citing tarot. I don't know if any of you have gotten tarot readings. People on y'all? No? Okay. I had a devastating tarot reading, and it was in front of my friend. It was given by a friend in front of other friends. And part of what was devastating is that, it was like, oh, here's the truth that we already knew. Sometimes, I don't know if y'all have had that experience. That was a rough one. So this is citing tarot, Pflugerville, Texas, and Pflugerville is a suburb of Austin. So, citing tarot, Pflugerville, Texas. I learned how to hug here, how to draw a boundary and hold here against the gale force of my mother's late night rage and sob, learned too what it meant to be chosen, to choose, brought myself back to the receiving line, my chest cracked into 2 wet pieces after a fall so lonesome I wasn't sure I'd survive, and met the arms practiced in mending. I asked Jenny to read my cards, Sid and Shannon on the couch behind me, Amber and Joe in the kitchen, Nat in from Berkeley, the kids running around, Carlicia, I'm sure, at my right hand. Jenny spread the Celtic cross, gestured as she does, which is to say grandly at my present, at the problem we all knew, the past, the conscious and unconscious, waited for the cards to name what we could all see there at the position of hopes and fears. 3 swords and 1 heart. How rude, I thought. Y'all see this shit? I said aloud, the room gone quiet. A relief not to have to say what I had known in the room where I'd learned the kind of love possible between friends, now family, the kindness possible between partners, grateful for the rough blow finally landed and the net to catch me. Y'all, if you get 3 swords and 1 heart, you check on some things. Check it out. Make sure everything works the way it's supposed to. All right. What are these pictures? Okay. So 3 more from the Renunciations, so 4 total, and then a newer poem, which I like to close with. All right, so this poem is titled Citing Almost. I was sad. I don't know if y'all got that from these earlier poems. And so I was trying to figure out some stuff, and I went for a hike as one does. I don't like to hike, but I was like, this might help. And I went for a hike with my grandpa's dear friend, Steve. Steve is like a Ned Flanders, Ted Lasso kind of guy. Mustache, cheerful, right? I'm me, so sad. She's like, oh. And Steve was like, we gotta go, high knees all the way up. And I decided to hike with Steve in Yosemite. And so I think that sort of helps to understand what's happening here. So this is Citing Almost, Vernal Fall, Yosemite National Park. Never mind the 600 stairs carved in granite, or my guide, a man with a mustache and no concept of almost, or my moaned, why are we going up this hill at every hill, or his response that what comes up must go down, or the somewhere we've almost reached. Mind instead the 3 friends who breached the safety rail for a picture on the rocks and were swept over the falls by a river gorged with the melting snowpack. How they must have held each other in their descent before the Merced broke them apart. That was some time ago. An old man hiking with his son-in-law flatters me. You were only pretending to be tired to make us feel better. I was not. The truth. I have come here to learn how not to kill myself. My guide takes my pictures many times as we ascend. He captures Half Dome, El Capitan, Nevada Fall, and me, nearly upright, a silhouette before the sun. A dead thing that in dying feeds the living. I've been thinking about the anatomy of the egg, about the two interior membranes, the yolk held in place by the chalazi, gases moving through the semi-permeable shell. A curious phrase, the anatomy of the egg, as if an egg were a body, which it is, as if the egg could be broken, then mended, which, depending on your faith, broken, yes, but mended? Well, best to start again with a new body, voided from a warmer one, brooded and turned. Better to begin as if some small-handed animal hadn't knocked you against a rock, licked clean the rich yolk, and left the albumin to dry in the sun, as if a hinged jaw hadn't swallowed you whole. What I wanted, a practice that reassured that what was cracked could be mended or at least suspended so that it could not spread. But now I wonder, better to be the egg or the scaled mandible, the small hand or the flies, bottle black and green, spilling their bile onto whatever's left, sweeping the interior, drinking it clean. I think something might have grown there, though I know it was never meant to be eaten. It was always meant to spoil. Okay, so the title of this poem is The Moon Rose Over the Bay, I Had a Lot of Feelings. There is no moon and there is no bay. I just want to relieve you of like searching for that in the poem. Neither of those is there. Okay. It's just vibes. The moon rose over the bay, I had a lot of feelings. The home I've been making inside myself started with a raising, a brush clearing, the thorn and nettle, the blackberry bush falling under the bush hog. Then I rested. A cycle fallow said, winter said, the ground is too cold to break pony, said, I almost set fire to it all, lit a match, watched it ghost in the wind. Came the thaw, came the melting snowpack, the flooded river, new groundwater, the well risen. I stood in the mud field and called it a pasture, stood with a needle in my mouth and called it a song. Everything rushed past my small ears, were in the leaves, were in the wing and the wood. About time to get a hammer, I thought. About time to get a nail and saw. So I want to thank y'all for your very good attention and for laughing at my jokes. It's a big ask sometimes, so I appreciate it. So I'm going to read one more poem, and it is a love poem for my sweetie. And I gave it to her for her birthday. This was a little bit, I like to think of it, and I've been calling it sort of like macaroni art. So like I got her like real presents, but then I was also like, I made this. But I like it. I worked on it. But still macaroni art, so gotta have a real present alongside it. So this is titled, What is the Measure, for Melissa. I catalog what I cannot capture. The sun, its ragged stumble into rock face, the precise elevation of this plateau or the next, the sea, of course, against which everything is measured. My tools are insufficient, inexact. For instance, there is no way to measure the peak against the distance from the tip of one ring finger to the other, no matter my arm's position, outstretched, limp, akimbo. For instance, there is no way to weigh the earth pushed out of earth against the gravity of my body, its bones, its sacks, its meat and animating light. I submit. I do not constitute the mountain, this in spite of the palette of old quilts and newly fallen maple leaves I've made at its immeasurable base. I submit. I do not constitute the field, although I have harrowed its length, its width, with my long foot, my slow step. Never mind I hear what scurries or scatters, what burrows or bounds. Never mind I raise my hand to hover the bent grass, the echinacea's bald crown, all of which withers or writhes, all of which is new or nearly the same before my foot's next fall. I submit. As with the mountain, the field. As with the field, you. ineluctable as a season, sun ragging the rock face. Your arm nearly as long as mine, your palm wider, your mouth a beginning, your eyes, of course, that against which everything else is measured. You harrow, and the summit writhes. Your broad foot falls, and the field akimbo gives up its gravity, lets loose its bodies, its bones, thrums an animating light. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions y'all might have. Questions about writing, questions about the poems I read. I don't know, questions about Iowa City if you have some burning desire to know something. I mean, I might not know is also the thing, so. Yeah.
So when you're writing poetry, what are some of like the bad habits that you still kind of find yourself kind of like falling into, if there are any that you can think of?
So the question, I think, is when I'm writing, what are the bad habits that I find myself falling into? I find that an interesting question because I do think like there is a school of writerly thought that one should write every day, and I don't. I'm not a particularly disciplined person. And so I think perhaps all of my habits gesture towards bad habits. And yet, I really love my process, and I've built my life in such a way that I can work with it. And so I like to write from 10 at night till, say, like 1 in the morning. Like, that's the window that I really like to write in. But I have a job, and I can't really do that it's hard to do. So during the school year, when I'm teaching, I tend not to write very much. But in the summer, Melissa goes away, my wife, she goes away. She likes to go away to write. And I like to be home. So it works out. So I have the home residency, and she has to get on a plane. So I'll just write from for those 2 weeks or 3 weeks. A good chunk of that I'll spend writing. And I just see that as the time when I write. And I think I also don't put a lot of pressure. And I think this is a good habit, actually. I don't put a lot of pressure on any individual poem to be good. I really like the process of writing. I like the practice of writing. It feels good to do. And so I'll just let it be whatever it is. And then I'll circle back. Sometimes I'll get a little nugget that feels fun. I'm like, oh, I want to make this into something. And other times I'm like, oh, we'll come back. We'll check on you in some years and see how you're doing. But yeah, so I don't know, I don't necessarily think of my habits as bad habits, but I don't think I wouldn't want to put them in a craft book. This is what you do to be, I just do the thing that has worked for me for the last 20, 22 years, which is whatever I want to do. I would advise y'all to do the same, but I don't know what your lives are like. So, I do think sometimes we have these senses of external pressure about what we should or should not be doing. And I think as long as we're writing, if we want to write, we've cleared the bar. I like to put that bar on the ground. I like to dig a trench and then put the bar in the trench and then cover it up. And I'm like, I did it. And that just makes it more fun. I don't know. So that's my answer to your question, which is a little all over the place, but thank you for it. Other questions?
So you have 2 poetry collections, Bestiary and the Renunciations. And I'm just curious, how was the process different for you in creating these 2 collections, and how did that feel when you were writing?
That's a great question. So the question is, I have these 2 poetry collections. How did the processes of putting these collections together differ, and how did I feel about, how are my feelings different in putting them together? Does that sound?
Yes.
Okay. So with my first book, I was very much I had graduated from my MFA program. I knew none of the poems in my MFA thesis. Well, almost none of them were gonna my MFA thesis was not a book. And sometimes people are like, your MFA thesis should be a book. So if you decide to go to an MFA program, your Your MFA thesis does not have to be a book. I don't know. And I was very young. I was like 21. And so I knew by the time I graduated, I was like, I'm not a person who can write a book. I was like 24. I was like, I'm going to give myself some time. But once I had as soon as I had 48 pages, I was like, okay, let me see if this is a book. And I just spent the next 3 years doing that over and over and over again. So I was putting a lot of pressure on the poems to cohere or come together. And I could have waited probably, but I didn't know that at the time. So the lesson that I learned from putting that book together with the Renunciations was that I could just take my time, and I could look at the poems that I had written in the years before and the poems that I was currently writing during the time that I was working on the poems that would come into the Renunciations alongside a bunch of other poems as well. And I just thought, it can just be whatever it's going to be. Let me see what's here. But I do think that is the benefit of time for me. It's the benefit of time, and it's the benefit of what I describe as volume. I have a lot of poems now. So it's not I don't just have 48 that I'm trying to make into a book. It's there's been enough time, there have been enough years where I have poems that I have a new manuscript now, and it's poems that I wrote at the same time that I was writing the Renunciations. So those are from 2015, 2016, something like that, to 2022. And I just printed everything out, and I was like, oh no, I got to figure out how these go together. Or I don't have to, because no one's please give us another book. But I wanted to make another collection. And that just feels a lot more chill than kind of scraping everything. Please, do I have enough? Do I have enough? I've been very lucky in a lot of ways, but I felt really grateful that I had the time to take my time with the Renunciations. They accepted it. Graywolf accepted it in 2019. And it didn't come out until 2021. So we had a really long editorial process as well. So I think I wouldn't have expected this when I was younger, but it's been really nice to have time. I think I was a little bit in a hurry, but then no one took the book, so it ended up taking time. So it took a little while for the first book to get picked up, but I think that was for the best. But yeah, so that's how, I don't know, that felt a little jumbled, but I think that's about it. I think that covers it. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
How do you go about editing your poems? Because I find I have a really hard time changing the original words that I wrote when I write poems.
So this question is asking about my editorial process. It really does depend on the poem, and it depends on whether or not that poem is in a sequence that is related to other poems. So if the poem is on its own, I'm really trying to pay attention to what the poem seems to want to do. So I'm not always changing a lot of the content. I'm not always changing a lot of the words, but sometimes I do end up having to make some big cuts because the poem seems to want to be a sonnet, and I have 30-something lines. So I'm like, oh, well, some of these have to go to get to 14. And that can be really exciting. And it feels oh, this actually could have been a lot tighter. This could have been a lot more concise. And it's not that earlier draft was bad or wrong. It's just a different experience. I have found letting things sit for a long time and then coming back with eyes that are not interested in recapturing the feeling, but rather just experiencing the poem. Is it working? I feel that's always the question. Is is the poem working? Is it doing the thing that I want it to do? Is it clearing? So I do have a low bar. I have a very low bar for writing poems. So no poem has to clear the high bar of what I like poems to do, because that's kind of a high bar. The practice of writing is separate from that in some ways. But if it's a poem that I think I'm going to want to share, then it needs to clear that bar, which is different from this bar. And that's delightful. And so then I'm looking at it as is this something I would want to share with other people, not just in terms of content, but also in terms of craft. And that puts a different kind of pressure on the poem. If it's a poem that's a part of a larger sequence, so this might be something to like think about. If you look at poems that you've written in the last semester and you print them all out, which I suggest printing, you print them all out and you read them and you actually like read them, read every single word. What words are you repeating? Right? What images are recurring and recurring? If you're imagining these poems living together, is there a way to tune the poems to each other so that you're not necessarily repeating words or images, but like, or you are, but you're doing it deliberately? And that to me is another way that I like to revise like the poems together. Like, oh, I use the word maze a lot. I probably can't use it as much as I would like. Or, oh, there are so many birds. Maybe I should take out some of these birds, put them somewhere else. And it's helpful to really look at my work together to see what I've been doing. So this business with like my meat and my bones and sacks and all that, it's just like that's been a thing for like the last year. I don't know what's going on, but I know I can't have a bunch of poems that say, you know, my sacks and bones and animating light. I feel like you could do that one time, you know? So for me, it's like, it's a question of like, is it working? And then if I'm imagining the poems together, do I need to repeat everything that's being repeated, or can I sort of let the pattern emerge something emerge over the course of a sequence? Which again, may or may not be helpful, I don't know. I'm a haphazard reviser. It's very, again, discipline. Who is she?
So, thank you. I noticed like in the Renunciations you have some poems that are, you know, like you were saying, the deer poems, epistolary poems. And then I noticed, as you were just talking about your poems, in a lot of cases you were like, oh, this is a love poem, or this is my macaroni art poem, it's a poem I wrote, you know, to read to one person. So I wonder, like, how often for you in your process are you thinking about, like, one reader, like you're writing to someone? And I guess just in general, how do you balance that with then thinking, okay, this is something I'm going to try to publish, or this is something that I'm going to read at a place like this?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, that's a great question. So how often am I thinking about like my one audience member versus not thinking about the one audience member versus thinking about something I actually want to share?
You can like think of both of those things at the same time in some way. Like,
So so if I'm writing a love poem, that's to somebody. So like all the love poems, like I think of love poems as being like to, an offering to someone. So I think of like that tarot poem as a love poem. And it's to my friends who I was really sad and they were like, come down here and we will hug you and feed you tacos. And I was like, even now I'm just like, I'm going to go back next week and they're going to hug me and give me tacos. I'm very excited. But like, so in the writing of the poem, that's, I think, the low bar, right? I'm going to write a love poem to Melissa. I'm going to write a love poem to my ex. I'm going to write a love poem, right? Like whoever my beloveds are, I'm going to write a love poem to them. So then I want to try to think about what they might like in a poem. And one of the things that Melissa said to me, Melissa Phoebos, my beloved, I wrote her a poem and I was like, this is about you. And she said, no, this is about you. I was like, leave me alone. Because that's true. That's also the other thing about love poems. They really do show you how you think about love or how you think about that other person. It's not really it's not showing you the other person in the same way. So then I was like, let me think about that. Let me think about like how I can express that. Like, I know I can't write the poem that is about her. I do not constitute her, but this is how it feels to be in proximity. So, right. So, and then I wrote it and I was like, oh, this is good. It went, bing, right? Because sometimes that happens, and other times it absolutely does not. And so when it doesn't, and I don't want to do the work that it might take to clear that bar, that's putting too much pressure on the poem to clear that bar, then I just let that one sit. But sometimes, like, you know, you get a good draft. I get a good draft, and I'm like, this is nice. I'm going to want to share this one. And I think I knew that with What Is the Measure, because I was like, this is good. But it is like, but it does be, so I think like that's that other question is like, is it something I want to share? like, do I have this sort of buzzy feeling in myself, like, ooh, this is one I want to read out loud. This is one that I want to share with other people. Then, like, that's a different sort of question of audience. I think it moves into something that's a bit more like art, you know, and not just macaroni art, which is what we call that poem in the house. So, yeah. Thank you. I think we have time maybe for one more question. Yes.
How do you think your writing style has changed throughout the years?
How do I think my writing style has changed throughout the years? That is a great question. I think my sentences are longer sometimes because I worked on that. I didn't realize, but I used to write like in the past, like, and I do like a declarative sentence, or I like a short sentence. But I didn't realize I was doing it. And then someone, again, like, I've been very lucky. So I gave a reading and someone was asking me about my short sentences. And I was like, oh, short sentences. Okay. I thought, I want to write some longer sentences. Let me try to figure out how to do that. And so I did like some imitations of the poet Carl Phillips' work. And I just tried to think about, like, what am I trying to say that's long, right? I've become a lot more aware of my choices so that they still sort of come out of a kind of instinct or intuition, but then I understand more how they're working. So I've developed a kind of soft logic for what I do or why I do it. I would say that's actually a big change, because then I feel like I have a little bit more control when I'm going into the poems, but also I know when I'm doing something that I've been doing. And I think I want to do something different. I want to have fun in a different kind of way. So I'm just like it's a little bit more meta, if that makes sense, like in the writing process. But I don't know in the style. Like, I don't know how that's different. But I think my relationship to writing is really different. It used to be more product-oriented, the poem as a product. And now it's, as I've been talking about today, it's more process-oriented, because the process has anchored my life for like 2 decades. And I just feel really grateful to the fact of that. So whatever I make, it'll be fine, you know? And so I try to have fun. I try to make things that are interesting to me. Reading, teaching poetry collections, sharing poetry collections with other people. Just the reading itself is actually really vital. Like, I think it's kept me a little bit livelier in the verse than I would be otherwise. Yeah, so I have no idea how to answer that question, but I just said some things. I hope that helps or reveals something. Thank you all so much. This was so fun. Y'all are great. And I am happy to sign books if you buy books or have a book. I love writing my name. So let's say hi.